Most believe the nightmare in Cambodia began on April 17, 1975. But that is not the truth. Monsters are not born, they are made. They are incubated in the dark, fed by chaos, and strengthened by the silence of the world. Before the killing fields, there was another war, a forgotten 5-year civil war that tore the soul of the Khmer nation apart, transforming paradise into a slaughterhouse. Why did a beloved God King shake hands with his mortal enemies to burn down his own kingdom? How did a neutral nation become the most heavily bombed country in history per capita? And why has history chosen to obscure this bloody chapter? Welcome to Asia Unciphered. Today, we are opening the sealed files to investigate the incubation of a tragedy. This is the story of the forgotten civil war in Cambodia. To understand the fall, we must first look at the height. We have to travel back before 1970 to a time when Cambodia was known as an island of peace. Picture Phnom Penh in the 1960s. It was the pearl of Asia. The scent of fresh baguettes mixed with lemongrass and the humidity of the Mekong. Jazz music floated out of French colonial villas. While neighboring Vietnam was consumed by fire, Cambodia seemed like an oasis under the rule of Prince Norodom Sihanouk, a miraculous oasis where time had stopped. Sihanouk was complex. He played a dangerous game of geopolitical acrobatics, balancing between the United States, China, and North Vietnam.
To our continued prosperity, my friend.
However, beneath the surface, the economy was stagnating. The elite were hoarding wealth, and the patience of the political right was wearing thin.
Prince Sihanouk is currently abroad.
Lon Nol was the opposite of Sihanouk. He was a mystic, deeply superstitious, and fiercely anti-communist. He abolished the monarchy and declared the Khmer Republic, believing he could purge Cambodia of Vietnamese influence and restore the glory of the ancient Angkor Empire. But in seizing power, he unlocked the gates of hell. At this point, the Khmer Rouge was nothing more than a ragtag group of radical guerrillas hiding in the jungle, numbering fewer than a few thousand. With no real support from the peasantry, they were irrelevant. But then, Sihanouk went on the radio. Across the rice paddies, he called on his children, the peasants, to run to the jungle, to join the resistance, and to fight the usurper, Lon Nol. The peasants didn't understand communism. They didn't know who Pol Pot was. They only knew that their king had been wronged, and he was calling them. Thousands flocked to the jungle, swelling the ranks of the Khmer Rouge overnight. Sihanouk, in his thirst for revenge, became the greatest recruitment tool the communists ever had. As the insurgency grew, the sky above Cambodia turned black. To prop up the failing Lon Nol regime and hunt down Vietnamese sanctuaries, the United States launched a bombing campaign of apocalyptic proportions. Operations with code names like Menu and Freedom Deal unleashed hundreds of thousands of tons of explosives onto the Cambodian countryside. If you look at the maps from that era, the rural areas are a sea of red dots. Each dot is a crater. Villages were vaporized. Rice fields became moonscapes. This aerial destruction had a terrifying psychological effect. It didn't just kill enemies, it radicalized the survivors. The Khmer Rouge cadres would point to the craters, to the shattered bodies of farmers, and tell the grieving families that this was the work of the city people, the work of the imperialists supported by Lon Nol. The bombs did not destroy the insurgency. They acted as an accelerant. They stripped away the humanity of the rural population, replacing grief with a cold, hard hatred for the city dwellers. The Khmer Rouge no longer needed to force people to fight. The sky was doing the convincing for them. By 1972 and 1973, the country was essentially cut in two. The cities were islands controlled by Lon Nol's government, while the vast countryside belonged to the Khmer Rouge. Inside Phnom Penh, the republic was rotting from the inside out. The army of Lon Nol, known as Phank, was plagued by massive corruption. Commanders created ghost soldiers, names listed on the payroll who didn't exist, so they could pocket the American aid money. Real soldiers were sent to the front lines in flip-flops with rusting rifles, often unpaid and starving, while officers partied in the nightclubs of the capital.
Cheers. This wine is excellent.
The noose began to tighten. The Khmer Rouge cut the major highways and strangled the supply lines along the Mekong River. Phnom Penh, a city designed for 600,000 people, swelled to over 2 million as refugees fled the fighting and the bombing in the countryside. The city became a dystopian nightmare. Rockets rained down daily on markets and schools.
Cheers.
The air was thick with the smell of diesel, uncollected garbage, and fear. But out in the liberated zones, something even more sinister was happening. The Khmer Rouge began to shed their mask. They were no longer fighting for Sihanouk. They forced monks to disrobe, banned traditional music, and enforced the wearing of black pajamas. They were testing their year zero on the peasantry, hardening them into unfeeling instruments of war. The world, distracted by the imminent fall of Saigon in neighboring Vietnam, barely noticed that Cambodia was morphing into a concentration camp. Then came the end, or rather, the beginning of the darkness. By early 1975, the American Congress halted aid. The lifeline was cut. The Khmer Republic collapsed like a house of cards. On the morning of April 17, 1975, the silence broke. Not with the joy of liberators, but with the cold detachment of executioners. The people of Phnom Penh cheered. They poured into the streets waving white flags, throwing flowers. They believed the war was over. They were wrong. Within hours, the order was given. The loudspeakers blared a lie that would cost millions of lives. Americans are going to bomb the city. You must leave. Leave your homes. Don't take anything. At gunpoint, the entire city was forced to march out into the countryside. Hospitals were emptied. Surgeons were forced to leave mid-operation. The sick, the elderly, the pregnant, everyone was pushed onto the dusty roads under the scorching sun. There was no American bombing. There was only the Angkar, the organization. The city was emptied, left as a ghost town echoing with the wind. The civil war had ended, but the genocide had begun. The people of the city were now the new people, enemies of the revolution, stripped of their rights, their possessions, and their names. Looking back at the Civil War of 1970 to 1975, we see the anatomy of a catastrophe. It was Sihanouk's vanity, Lon Nol's incompetence, the Cold War's brutality, and the Khmer Rouge's fanaticism, all colliding in a perfect storm. The killing fields were not created in a day. They were built over 5 years. History often focuses on the explosion, but the detective must look at the fuse. The tragedy of Cambodia teaches us a haunting lesson, that a society can be dismantled piece by piece until nothing is left but dust and blood. It reminds us that when we ignore the suffering of a nation, when we treat a country as a chessboard for larger powers, we create the conditions for monsters to rise. This was the war the world forgot, but it is a memory the ghosts of Cambodia can never let go. This is Asia Unciphered. Thank you for watching.